Hello everyone, and welcome back to my ghillie suit crafting guide series. It's been a while since I've done one of these videos, but now I'm doing part 2 to this guide series, and it's going to be crafting what I would use for mask wear, so goggles, hat, and mesh mask, lower face protection, all will be crafted in this series. It's starting to be the summer season here where I live, and all the green vegetation is spreaded throughout the fields that I play at. So I'm going to be crafting my Boonie and my goggles in this video. The Boonie is the Ghillie 3D Boonie, and the goggles I'm wearing are the Fixate H2 Max goggles. These goggles are what I would prefer when I run my ghillie suit, and that's what I'm going to be using. So to start this crafting series, I'm going to be needing these materials. First, I'll need zip ties. Second off, I will need spray paint. I chose a lighter color because the Boonie is already a darker green color. I'll also need some super glue. Preferably, I normally use what would you call shoe glue, but in this case I use crazy glue. And then I also use raffia, which is a substitute for zip ties if you don't want to use zip ties, but I prefer using both. And also you can use Rit dye to dye your leaves, or to dye whatever like Boonie you'd wear. So to start this guide series off, I'm going to be crafting my 3D ghillie Boonie. To start off, I'm going to use spray paint to give the lighter areas of the darker green Boonie and lighten up the lighter areas a little bit more with this tan spray paint. So in the areas that are already slightly tannish greenish, I'm going to be adding a little bit more tan to that spray paint area, and I'm going to be just dabbling the spray paint in each area of the Boonie just a little bit, just to add that nicer finish and to add a little bit better lighter areas on the dark green Boonie. For the materials I use for this Boonie, I'm using the same webbing mesh that I use for my 3D ghillie suit crafting series, and I'm just reusing those pieces. They're already pre-painted, so I can just have those as my leaves portion of the Boonie. I'm also using artificial leaves that you'd buy at like a florist shop, where you could buy like trees and plants and different bushes and all sorts of flowers. You can also find artificial leaves at those shops, and that's what I'm using in this video. They're very live-like. You may need to add spray paint to change the color of them to make them less as light, but I've already done that beforehand, and they're the right color that I would need to add to my suit. I'm also using KMCS webbing mesh as well, the KMCS veil, and then raffia. Like I stated beforehand, I'm using raffia, and I use that to tie on some of the materials or add extra concealment. So this is how I add the webbing mesh to the KMCS Boonie. It's very simple. It's the same technique I used in the first custom ghillie suit guide, and I'm just using the same method. It's very simple. You just weave it through the mesh, poke a little hole through the webbing mesh that I'm adding to the suit, and then tie it down. Once you've done that, make sure to cut the zip tie so it's not sticking up out of the Boonie and getting caught on different trees or materials outside in the environment you're in. And then I just spread that throughout the Boonie. So some of the ways I tie down my Boonie, I use a zip tie as well. In this scenario, you could use raffia, but I choose to use zip ties because they're more stable, even though they can be hard plastic and stick through and puncture your head when you're wearing it. It's still on the safer side to use zip ties because it can hold the materials better together. So in this case, this artificial leaf already has a hole connecting the stems together, so I weave in the zip tie through the hole and then tie it down, and from there I cut the excess zip tie at the end so it's not sticking out and preventing me from moving through low brush and not getting caught on anything. For this style of leaf, there was no hole to put the zip tie through, so I had to puncture my own hole with a little knife, and then from there you can tie down the zip tie by weaving the leaf through the boonie and then through the leaf as well. Make sure when you're weaving the leaf down, make sure it's positioned in a good spot, not sticking super high up outside the boonie, and make sure it's positioned in a way where it's not going to stick out too badly and give away your position. Also, when you're placing these leaves down, make sure you place them in areas that would break up the silhouette. So I'm setting these green leaves on top of the lighter areas of my boonie where it's tan, so it breaks it up with a darker color, which is the leaf color in this scenario. With this leaf, there's no hole and there's no way for me to puncture a hole, so I had to just tie the zip tie around the leaf itself. And since it's not connected to the boonie as well as I would like, I made a special section where I added a second zip tie, and I added that to the higher portion of the leaf that was going to flap down, and this leaf kind of needed it as well, so I added another zip tie to the top portion. I punctured a hole through that leaf where it was loose and hanging down, and then I used the zip tie to tie it down so that when I'm in game, the leaf doesn't fold down from the side of my boonie and get in my way and prevent me from seeing different targets and getting caught on different trees and stuff like that. Now I'm adding raffia to my boonie. To do this, I use just the standard raffia. I didn't paint it. Another good idea to do is paint it with that red dye that I showed in the beginning portion of this video as supplies. Dyeing your raffia can add better concealment to your raffia, but I also like having lighter colors to my boonie to break up the silhouette, like I've said before, and this is another way of doing it with this lighter raffia. I tie this down just by weaving it through the mesh and doing a simple knot 3 times, and that is usually stable enough. Now this raffia is pretty long, so I ended up weaving it through the boonie 3 more times in 3 different areas, so it's broken up throughout the boonie, and this gives you a little bit more areas where you can have raffia in all sorts of sides and sections of the boonie, not just in one little spot. This is a way of having it spread out throughout the boonie, and then I just knot it and tie it down just like that. And I do this a couple times with a couple different pieces of raffia. So far you guys are probably asking yourselves, why am I adding so much green vegetation and not breaking it up with at least some browns or some different colors? Well, here we go. I'm adding the KMCS concealment veil to the boonie as well. This is just some scraps that I had laying around from just spare KMCS. Doesn't have to be super pretty or neat. I just cut it up into different slices and used it as just spare leaves so I could add it to the suit. It's perfect because it has the right size of holes needed to puncture the hole through with the zip tie, so you can add it to the boonie. And that's what I did in the darker green areas of the boonie. I added the lighter brown KMCS veil to those areas, and it's pretty simple. You just zip tie it, and that you can find out in the custom ghillie suit crafting series that I made with the no-bridge ghillie. If you have any questions with that, you can go back to those videos to check out how I added the KMCS concealment veil to the boonie. But otherwise, this is the finished product, and it turned out really well in my opinion. You don't want to overdo it with materials, but you want to keep it well spread out throughout the area with materials added throughout the boonie, and this is what it will look like when you're finished. The next piece to my headgear that is very important that I'm going to be crafting is the goggles. You want to pick a pair of goggles that do not fog and that you can also add materials to the outside of the goggles to. The first material that I'm going to be using is the KMCS veil, and this is it's actually the bag that it came in. I'm just reusing the material so I'm not wasting anything, and I'm getting the most use out of my product that I bought from Kicking Mustang, obviously. And this is the way I'm using the veil. I'm cutting it down to slices into the 2 flaps that it came in, and you can buy his KMCS products at empireairsoft.com, and that's what I'm using right now. This is going to be the main base for the goggles. You can add this to the bottom of the goggles just by using the thin liner that's in the KMCS veil baggie. That little line that goes across the KMCS veil, you would add to the bottom of the goggles just by adding glue. Once you've done that, once you've added the glue, you just stick it down as best as possible before the glue dries, obviously, because I was having that issue a little bit. The glue would dry super fast, and by the time I stick it down completely, it would be undry. So make sure you stick it down quick enough and you have enough glue on the goggles to keep it held down. Now, before I go any further of crafting these goggles, I do want to mention that this style of goggles that I'm crafting is the same technique that Kicking Mustang would use when crafting his goggles, and I'm just maybe doing it in a different process, but using the same format he would use because it seems to work out for him when he goes to play. So I'm just using some of the techniques and learning from what he did and doing this similar steps to doing the same process to my goggles. So I found areas on the top of the goggles that needed concealment, so I added glue along the edges and the border of the goggles, and then stuck down whatever KMCS veil I had left. And then I also used the webbing mesh from the last series that I used. I had some spares left over, so I just added it to the edges where there was low concealment. So I was missing some concealment on the left side of the goggles, so I added a little bit of the webbing mesh to that side, and then at the top right I added some of that same material to that side as well. Sometimes you want to add as much glue as you possibly can, but make sure you do that without putting glue on the lens itself, because that will ruin your vision when you are going to play. It will obstruct the view and you won't be able to see anything. Then I added also raffia to the top portion. From there I was able to just stick it down with the glue. It's a little bit more difficult adding the raffia than adding the mesh to the goggles because the raffia is very thin, so be careful when doing that. Maybe wearing gloves would help so you don't get so much glue everywhere, but that's the best way I did it. And I used the crazy glue, but I highly recommend using shoe glue, because that's what I would be using if I wasn't using the crazy glue. So shoe glue helps a lot in that situation. And next up, I want to add some green to the darker areas of the goggles where the KMCS is, and also where the lens changes color, or well, where the goggles changes color. So around the green border I added the green moss with the glue that I had, and I just stuck down as much as I could get to hold, and I added that to the sides of the goggles where it is a darker color and stuck it down from there. The next step in crafting your goggles is adding spray paint to the black portion of the band that's holding your goggles to your face. The black sticks out, so I decided to spray paint it over with my tan spray paint that I already had available. So I coated that over the band, and I did multiple layers. Once you've got enough layers down to make it as color based as possible to blend in with your mesh mask and so that you're concealed when you're out playing in the field, I let it dry for a solid 30 to 45 minutes, and then I was able to pick them up again and wear them on my face. So that is pretty much how I crafted my goggles. I think they turned out really well, and they're very similar to how Kicking Mustang would do it. It's the same style, but his is obviously better in so many different ways. But I think for me, my personal crafting experience and skill set, I think it turned out pretty good. And like I was saying before, it is the same style. He crafts his with the Hero Shark goggles, and if you ever wanted to pick up a pair of those, you can probably pick them pre-crafted up on the Empire website. And then my Boonie turned out really well, and then the mesh mask is another portion that I recommend you wearing on the field because facial protection is always needed. And I did not show how to craft it because it's literally the same process as you would craft the goggles. You just stick on the material with the glue and spread it throughout the mesh mask, making lighter areas and darker areas spread out throughout the mask in different portions with different materials added. What I really want to hit on is making sure that you leave holes with nothing crafted on the mask so that you can breathe. I mean, if it's all covered, you're not going to be able to breathe. And as you've seen on different stories I made on Instagram, I've been testing the mesh mask. It's the most difficult thing to craft on the ghillie suit for your face protection wise, so I highly recommend, from my experience of crafting the mesh mask, to make sure there's holes. So that's the end of this crafting series guide. If you guys have any questions, drop it in the comments. If you guys have anything you want to see on the next guide series for the crafting series, leave it in the comments. And as always, I'll see you guys next time. Have a great day.